Hey, Jeff Kennan here with you down at the USS North Carolina. The North Carolinians, we know this to be the showboat. The showboat teaches us and kind of illustrates for us strength. That's what I think about when I see this old girl. Strength. Well, one of my favorite leaders from the past is a gentleman by the name of Winston Churchill. I know you've heard about him, but what you might not know about Winston Churchill isn't the fact that he is always thought of as the savior of Britain. But there was a period of time where Britons hated him and he was defiled. Back in World War I, Churchill was actually Lord of the Admiralty. He was in charge of the British Navy. And he got into situations where he created enemies of his fellow politicians, and he didn't build bridges, and he didn't work with what he had. He didn't listen to his advisors. And ultimately, when campaigns occurred, like the invasion of Norway, he was defiled, and they hated him, and he kept making the wrong decisions, or he was being indecisive. He even created, in the middle of some of these crises, a thing called the fish policy, because he felt like there weren't enough fish coming into the island to feed the people, but he wasn't taking care of the U-boats that were attacking all the convoys that were taking place at the time. And in fact, to put this in perspective, one of the things Churchill did was he got on the radio and announced that half of the Nazi U-boat threat had been eliminated. Everyone knew it was a lie because he had no credibility. He wasn't telling the truth, and everyone knew it. And though it might sound like great propaganda in a time of war, it didn't work. So what happened to Churchill? He was sent home. He went and toiled in his garden, but he continued to write and say that the Nazis weren't going to go away quietly, but they were going to continue to expand and grow, and that we must be prepared for that threat. Well, years later, when that threat did come to fruition, who did the British government turn to? One of the most hated men in politics at the time, Winston Churchill, because one, as a good leader, he had earned credibility. All this time, he continued to tell the country about this threat. He continued to tell the world about this threat, and now it had occurred. So on May 10th, 1940, Churchill moves into number 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister, and within 3 weeks, the Battle of Dunkirk occurs. And who is the man to save all these soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk? It is Winston Churchill. Churchill made a speech not long after that. He said, "A miracle has occurred, and a large portion of our army, our navy, our soldiers have survived Dunkirk, but wars will not be won by evacuation." One of the things he did, he earned his credibility back, and the people charged around him. The second thing Churchill did, this time around, he told the truth. Good leaders have credibility, and they tell the truth. And instead of whitewashing Dunkirk, he told the British people what actually occurred at Dunkirk. The world heard about the failure that it was and how close the British came to losing all their military assets to the Germans. So he told the truth. The third thing Churchill did, which I find is amazing, is that he created imagery. So what some people would say is a sign of weakness, his cane, he used it as almost a pulpit, as almost a staff, as he worked his way through all of the reporters, all the media, all the movie footage from back in that day. He had that cane with him, and it became an image that was solidly part of Churchill. The other thing he did, his image was with his cigar. And now today, all these years later, we see these little porcelain British bulldogs with a British flag and a cigar. That is all from Churchill. He created an image in the people's mind that they knew that image was truthful and credible. And when you look back on Churchill's life and all of the mess ups that he had beforehand, it was like Churchill had a lot of the things that were needed, was the wrong time and the wrong place. But when it was the right time and the right place, he was the leader for that time. Interestingly enough, some of Churchill's leadership principles he actually learned from Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln very wisely brought in a lot of the people that were technically his political enemies and used them to be in his council. as he worked through the Civil War. Some of that is smart because you want to keep your enemies as close to you as possible. But Churchill took that same methodology and brought into his council some of his most arch defectors that didn't trust him and didn't like him, and he brought them in close. The other thing he did was he created a style of management from a prime minister standpoint. I still laugh about it when I hear about it, called MBWA, management by walking about. He actually got into the deep granular level of what was going on, and when they didn't have enough airplanes, he went down to the airplane factories himself. And when they didn't have enough pilots, he went down to the school where the pilots were being taught. He got into the details, and all those nosy things that we talked about that he had tendencies in the past to do, now they paid off in dividends because the country saw their bulldog walking the line with them. As leaders developing in our world, having credibility, telling the truth, and creating the image that people can attach themselves to is so important. As you develop your leadership style, whatever it is, point it in a direction that's based on credibility, is based on truth, and create that image that people can understand. I'm Jeff Kennan with Kennan Solutions down at the USS North Carolina. You have a great week.